With the passing of Labor Day, the president's working vacation at the LBJ Ranch came to an end. The summer, with its conventions and sudden flashes of world crises, was now over. Ahead, Washington and his last 140 days in office. Late in the afternoon on September the 4th, Special Assistant Rostow greeted Ambassador to Russia, Llewellyn Thompson. The president had summoned the ambassador to the White House to brief the National Security Council on events developing in Eastern Europe in the aftermath of the Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia. It was the first time they had assembled since their initial crisis meeting in August. Vice President Humphrey had flown in from his lakeside home in Minnesota, where he had been mapping the strategy for his presidential campaign. The president, throughout his entire tenure of office, had tried to take steps that would relax tensions with the Soviet Union and other communist countries. The Russian move against Czechoslovakia had, in effect, acted as a rebuff.
The leaders of the Soviet Union seem to have decided that a movement towards a humane version of communism in a small, friendly country is a threat to their security, despite the fact that the Czechs remain their ally in the Warsaw Pact. So new military and political risks have now arisen from this aggressive act, which demand ever closer cooperation among the Western allies.
On the following morning, the president turned his attention to domestic matters. He invited the congressional leadership to the White House for a working breakfast. Although the congressional breakfast is a long-standing executive tradition, President Johnson was the first to hold a meeting in the family dining room on the second floor. It was the first such get-together of the fall session. It would give the lawmakers an opportunity to brief the president on the status of all pending legislation, and in turn would afford the president a chance to express his views on each agenda item. The meeting began with some well-intentioned campaign advice to the newly nominated standard-bearer of the Democratic Party. But after the regional jokes had run their course, the group settled down to the serious business of planning legislative strategy. These were the Democrat leaders on the Hill, the men who had helped to bring his original platform mandate to reality, and who would now help him complete the administration's unfinished business. Mike Mansfield, Majority Leader, the man who channels legislation through the Senate. Senator Byrd of West Virginia, Secretary of the Democratic Policy Committee, a key lieutenant guarding the Senate floor. In the House, Speaker McCormick, who in 1961 succeeded the record-holding Sam Rayburn. The Speaker draws upon many long years of experience in the Congress to wisely direct the parliamentary maneuvering. Carl Albert, McCormick's right-hand man on the floor, using reason, influence, to gather in needed votes. Hale Boggs, the Majority Whip. He and his assistants sound out party sentiment, try to see that the members vote with the leadership. The whip polls may indicate major objections, may call for alterations to the pending bill to ensure passage. There were nearly 40 bills in various stages in Congress, representing a lot of work on the part of the executive as well as the legislative branches. The president emphasized the fact that each man, including himself, was being paid on a year-round basis. Even though there was a campaign on, there was business to do, all the way until January 20th. The president knew full well how much each man could accomplish in maneuvering the bills through Congress, for he himself had served in most of these leadership positions during his days on the Hill. Shifting the day's business to the cabinet room, the President presided over a comprehensive fiscal briefing, conducted for the most part by his budget director, Charles Wick. Both sides of the Senate aisle were represented, Minority Leader Everett Dirksen, as well as Majority Leader Mansfield. The main topics were the pending appropriation bills and the $6 billion spending cut that Congress had ordered in exchange for the 1968 tax increase. The President had instructed his cabinet to live within the $180 billion budget ceiling, but it now became apparent that commodity price supports and Medicaid payments, programs over which there was no executive control, were exceeding budget estimates by well over $1 billion. The President asked the Senate to make exemptions for both of these programs. Otherwise, the additional $1 billion would have to come out of some other already pared down source. The President expressed his views on other agenda items currently involving Senate action. His nomination of Justice Fortas had been stiffly opposed by a small sectional group. He urged the senators to talk with the committee chairman, pry the nomination out of committee, and report it to the Senate floor for final judgment. The President capped off his official day with an impromptu talk with the press. He opened the floor to the reporters, taking their questions on every topical subject, from the prospects of Senate action on the Non-Proliferation Treaty to world food production and population control. On September 8th, President and Mrs. Johnson opened the doors of the White House to over 1,000 children from low-income families in the Washington area. For once, the main attraction was not the magnificent staterooms on the first floor. For many of the district's children, life is by no means a ball of cotton candy. The social programs designed to make their lives more meaningful take time to reach fruition. Meanwhile, Mayor Washington and the First Family were convinced that the children should have at least one day to look through that magic window into the Never Never Land. In a moment of high humor, Vice President Humphrey gave the children a few lessons in the art of politics. To be a political candidate, you must first throw your hat into the ring. Once your candidacy is declared, you capture the ear of the party, which was quite a trick for each of the Democratic aspirants in 1968. Then a quick glimpse into the future, followed by a demonstration proving who will be the strong man on November 5th. The President's schedule for September 9th was heavy with events that seldom appear on the front page, but are nonetheless vital to the preserving of peace, as uneasy as that peace may be. Prime Minister Llewellyn of Israel once again brought his small nation's fears to the White House. Israel, living in the shadow of an ever-increasing Arab arsenal, sought to purchase American Phantom jets, the fastest, most versatile fighter bomber in current use. As the President made clear in a speech the following day, the United States had sought to limit all arms shipments to that troubled area, but at the same time recognized the legitimate needs of friendly governments throughout the Middle East. Hoping for reason to prevail, he would again exercise restraint, noting, however, that time is not on the side of peace. After his talk with Llewellyn, the President called in the bipartisan House leaders. Secretary of State Dean Rusk briefed them, not only on the latest discussion with Israel, but also the Paris peace talks and the Allied response to the events in Eastern Europe. The President used the occasion to urge action on the various appropriation bills, either in conference or in the House. Of particular importance, the Foreign Aid Bill. This program, his foreign policy advisors emphasized, helped alleviate conditions in the less developed countries, conditions that bred unrest and violence. Foreign aid helped small, friendly nations strengthen themselves against the threat of attack. Yet, in spite of these urgings, Congress later in the month would slash the President's foreign aid program to its lowest in history. And at the same time, through a major provision to the bill, expressed the sense of the Congress that the President should begin negotiations with Israel for the sale of as many supersonic planes as may be necessary to prevent Arab aggression. The give and take with Congress was a recurrent theme throughout his schedule-packed morning. With his Price Stability Committee, the President turned from foreign affairs to economics.
We don't think we would have had the inflation we have if we could have gotten a tax bill at Rome. But that's our system, and we do have checks and balances. And you can't mash a button and get Congress to act when you want it to. If we had, we'd have had a tax bill in '66. Hindsight, a great many people say, well, the President should have come out here and made him pass a tax bill in '66. Well, if I could have made him pass it, I would have. I gambled and thought I could make them pass it in '67, a non-election year. '66, they told me only 4 votes out of Ways and Means Committee, 25 would go with us. So rather than divide the country and try to get up here and carry on a big fight, we had no chance of winning. I thought, well, maybe you get the election behind you and maybe you can do it in '67. But we couldn't even do it then. In '68, we only did it after great efforts and phenomenal success and leadership by Secretary of Treasury. So we're paying for some of that now. And I think that we can be reasonably well satisfied with what we have achieved and the prosperity that we have. But we must learn how some way to cope with the biggest remaining economic challenge we have, and that is price stability.
The President's efforts to achieve a non-inflationary prosperity soon received a sharp blow. A week later, the Chrysler Corporation announced an excessive price increase on its 1969 models. If the price increase prevailed throughout the industry, $750 million would be taken out of the pockets of new car buyers. After immediate consultation with his Price Stability Committee and the Council of Economic Advisors, the President used the full force of his influence and reason to roll back the prices to an acceptable level.
Observation that one of the things that I have taken a great deal of satisfaction in the 5 years that I've been here is the general attitude of the business community and the labor community in cooperating with the official policies of their government.
The alliance between business and government was further strengthened only moments later, when President Johnson dedicated the Department of Housing and Urban Development building in Southwest Washington.
And just a few weeks ago, I came here in this very spot to sign into law the Housing Act of 1968, which we believe is the most far-reaching housing legislation that Congress has ever enacted in the history of this country. That law creates for the first time a national housing partnership, a venture which will enlist the resources of American business and labor in the effort to renew America.
The housing partnership, to be headed by Edgar Kaiser, would seek to stimulate private investment in low-cost housing, to attract large corporation money to finance the building of the 26 million homes and apartments needed in the next 10 years, including the replacement of all the 6 million slum dwellings that blighted the nation. But financing was only one problem to be overcome.
Imaginative business leader, the urgent question is not can we build all of this, but can we build it better and more beautiful? An environment of harmony and beauty cannot be a luxury. We think it is a necessity if we are to build new beauty and new order and new meaning into the lives of our fellow Americans. It would be tragic for us to wear blindfolds while we build, to fail to see that the squalor of the rich can be as dreary as the squalor of the poor. We have the power to see, and we have the duty to choose. What we are encouraging within government, we hope to foster in every area of American life. And that is a deep concern not just for quantity and not just for size in our achievements, but for quality and for style as well. And this great structure symbolizes our hope. The work that you do here each day will deeply influence the quality of life in America, the shape of our homes, our cities, our daily lives, the lives of our children, and the kind of life they will lead tomorrow.
On March 31st, President Johnson had ordered a bombing halt in all areas of North Vietnam except the immediate panhandle above the DMZ, an area through which massive numbers of infiltrators and their supplies of war continue to pour. As a result of this decision, the much-awaited truce talks with Hanoi began in Paris on May 13. During September, Ambassador Averell Harriman, President Johnson's chief negotiator at the talks, reported that after 4 months and a total of 21 formal sessions, there still had been no substantive discussions. The North Vietnamese negotiators clung to their long-held demand that all bombing must stop before they will discuss anything else. The President, in close counsel with his top military and foreign affairs advisors, repeatedly asked for assurances that Hanoi would reciprocate with some form of military de-escalation should the bombing be completely stopped. No such assurance was forthcoming. As the President and his advisors knew, dissident voices within the nation, within his own party, continued to sound long and loud for a complete bombing halt. And some even continued to challenge the American commitment in Vietnam. The President decided to make his administration's stand in Vietnam crystal clear once again, and to spell out in detail the compelling reasons for continuing to bomb the North Vietnam Panhandle. The forum for the occasion was the American Legion's 50th Annual National Convention in New Orleans.
When the first American soldiers went into South Vietnam in the early 1960s, it was because this nation saw that if the communist aggression, if that aggression there succeeded, the entire region of Southeast Asia would be in mortal danger, and the threat of world war would be more ominous. We have heard many voices raised in opposition to this stand. Indeed, I have sought some of these voices out. We have searched every avenue of thought and opinion on this issue that so troubles all of our people today. Now, let me make it as clear as I possibly can why we are still and will continue to bomb the panhandle of North Vietnam. Why reestablishing the DMZ, I think, is so critical to peace in Vietnam. In the area just below the DMZ, we and our allies have some 4 divisions of men and the necessary people to support them, involving more than 60,000 Americans and 1 division of South Vietnamese. Just behind them and the rest of I Corps are an additional 164,000 American and Allied fighting men. Those close in to the DMZ are subjected daily to artillery fire and the direct movement of enemy forces across that DMZ against them. And all of those men in I Corps are constantly subjected to a massive flow of supplies and infiltrators and rocket fire through the panhandle to the northern part of the battlefield. Now, if we can't take our men in, and we're not going to take our men out, it appears to me, third, that the best thing we can do is to bring our planes to bear in the panhandle across the line against the artillery and the trucks and the rocket launchers that are being fired on our men, and to bring it to bear against the enemy trucks and the enemy troops and the enemy supplies that are coming through. Because every secondary explosion, and there were thousands there last month, means that that powder and that steel doesn't have to be brought back from South Vietnam if it's stopped in North Vietnam by some American soldier in his body. So this afternoon I appeal to you to support your country, to support your fighting men, to support peace by maintaining strength in this country, by refusing always to bow to the demands of the moment, by refusing always to sacrifice principle in the things we hold dear, by standing as firm at home as you expect your sons to stand abroad, and ask yourself if you're doing it.
The nation's steadfastness in Vietnam was brought home forcibly in mid-September with a soldier's funeral for Major General Keith Ware, commander of the famed 1st Infantry Division. The general, a Medal of Honor winner for heroism in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, was directing troops in combat when his helicopter caught fire and crashed. In an impressive Medal of Honor ceremony on the South Lawn, the President decorated 5 members of the Army for conspicuous gallantry in Vietnam.
The men who stand here beside me today, impatient men who did not wait in the bunker until the battle was over, but joined it with incredible courage, know that the conflict in Vietnam demands something more than impatience. It demands steadfastness, the willingness and the ability to endure hardship and disappointment as long as the cause is honorable and in the quest for an honorable peace. The history of our country suggests that what the times demand, our people produce. And these times demand not only impatience that drives us to change and improve our country, but also steadfastness, so that what we have begun in hope will not be discarded in frustration and anger, so that the bravery of these men and their hundreds of thousands of comrades in arms will not have been offered in vain. We salute you, we thank you, we honor you.
One of September's more colorful moments was the official visit of Prime Minister and Mrs. Barrow of Barbados. As host and hostess for the nation, President and Mrs. Johnson have received over the years chancellors, presidents, emperors, and kings. They have received the chiefs of state of some of the world's largest countries, and quite frequently, the world's smallest. But in all cases, the event is a memorable one, and the hospitality is equal for all visitors. The pageantry of a state visit blends with personal warmth and rich tradition to make it the most elegant of all White House occasions. Each detail of the ritual has its own importance, and each is observed faithfully throughout the succession of presidents. When evenings are warm and the weather is fair, President and Mrs. Johnson have on occasion held a state dinner in the Rose Garden, an innovation of their own that greatly enhances the event.
Ms. Johnson and I are so pleased that the Barrows could come and bring this good Barbados weather to Washington for a delightful evening here this evening. The Prime Minister reminded us this morning that George Washington traveled to Barbados in 1751, and he was returning his visit.
When two chiefs of state dine together and exchange toasts to their respective countries, their remarks often underscore current national policies.
We act in the belief that no nation, large or small, can or should turn its back on another nation that may be the victim or may be unfortunate enough to be assaulted by aggression. We do not believe, from all that we've learned through the years at such painful cost, that there is ever any such thing, Mr. Prime Minister, as harmless aggression anywhere or any time. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a toast to Her Majesty the Queen.
During September, the President's cabinet presented him with a testimonial desk blotter, recounting some of the 450 landmark measures that he had written into law in the past 5 years. Not one of these legislative achievements came into being overnight. Each measure that passed, whether it dealt with schools, health, or conservation, saw change come slowly, following months, sometimes years of planning, reasoning, arguing, and compromising. And the work went on. For the remainder of his term in office, President Johnson would press his cabinet for full and comprehensive briefings on what remained to be done in each federal department. Wilbur Cohen, Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, focused attention on many areas where change was needed. Among them, the high cost of medicine and the work remaining in helping the mentally retarded. Secretary Cohen gave the President the annual report from the Committee on Mental Retardation, a report that shows not only what has been accomplished, but identifies the problem areas still to be surmounted.
I'm told that today we're able to detect with certainty only about 1/4 of the cases of mental retardation, and that we're able to prevent less than 2% of them. And this means that every day, thousands of children are falling farther behind in their classes, farther behind in life, farther away from any chance for happiness or fulfillment. And if these children lose in their struggle for education and fulfillment, the whole nation loses. And if they lose, we lose, because there are 6 million retarded citizens in America, and they are the largest single handicap group in the whole nation. The Edge of Change. That's a very appropriate title. We hear a lot about change in this country, particularly these times, and it gives me real pride that in a few years we seem to have identified this problem, and we seem to be coming to grips with it. So now I think is the time to move from the edge of change toward hope of real fulfillment.
A few days later, hope moved even further toward reality as the President signed into law an act that would give handicapped children a much earlier start in life.
Yet only 2 million of the nation's 5.5 million handicapped children are in reach today of the nation's special educational program. We think this bill will help us to change all of that, because it will provide from 70 to 100 model educational centers throughout the nation to help the handicapped. No one could doubt the determination of these youngsters, not if you have ever seen a crippled child struggle to walk across a room, or see a little retarded girl trace a picture again and again and again, determined to get it just right. And it gives me very special pleasure to think about the good that's going to flow from this legislation, to think about the lives that it's going to touch and the lives that it's going to help.
In autumn, the White House social calendar picks up momentum, but not all of the schedule is official. In one such informal and personal event, President and Mrs. Johnson had some old Texas friends over to dinner, some 250 of them. It was an evening of nostalgia, for these were the men and women whom the President had known for most of his life, and many of whom had shared his career for almost 4 decades. They came from Austin, San Antonio, Dallas. And they came from other places not so well known, Cotulla, Alice, and Blooming Grove. As September drew to a close, President Johnson knew he would soon join that exclusive fraternity of former office holders. He had often expressed in word and deed his affection and respect for his predecessors. In this spirit, President Johnson invited John Eisenhower, the former president's son, to the White House to receive a proclamation in honor of his father, a proclamation that would set aside a time in October as Salute to Eisenhower Week. The president not only showed regard for his predecessors, but went out of his way to make the transition smooth for his successor, no matter who it may be. He instructed his cabinet to maintain an open-door policy towards all presidential candidates, particularly in the area of foreign affairs. The president's personal choice for a successor, however, was clear. In 2 telegrams to the Texas Democratic Convention, he urged an all-out effort for the chosen candidates, Hubert Humphrey and Ed Muskie. Mrs. Johnson and Linda, with high spirits and indomitable faith in their party, put their personal touch on Mr. Humphrey's campaign. In a lively walk up Connecticut Avenue, they showed a phalanx of Washington reporters just where the action was. The annual meeting of the governors of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund provided the opening curtain on a highly colorful and rewarding day for the president. He made a surprise morning visit to deliver the keynote address, stressing the need for neighboring countries to work together in common development projects. Immediately afterwards, he received Eugene Black, his special advisor on economic development. Mr. Black had spent most of September in Southeast Asia, reviewing progress on varied regional projects financed by both the Asian Bank as well as American capital. He told how the Asian countries were making great strides in developing their water resources on a regional basis. Ancient problems between countries were still in evidence, but increasingly, the spirit of cooperation in pursuit of common goals was emerging. Moments later in the East Room, the president saw the same spirit of regional cooperation applied to problems in his own country. The Colorado River Basin Act was more than just another conservation measure. It marked the end of 2 decades of controversy. For Senator Carl Hayden, who had championed the measure, a much-deserved victory on this eve of his retirement from the Senate at age 90. For the president, it was doubly satisfying. He saw not only the triumph of reason over regional quarrels, but the far-reaching and effective plan for America's most valuable resource, water.
So this morning we have come here to sign another bill that will help assure us of the water that we need. This bill, as all of you know, is the Colorado River Basin Bill. This will be one of the largest reclamation projects that's ever authorized in any single piece of legislation. For 2 decades, the Colorado River has been the subject of unrelenting controversy and competing claims, and I've been in the middle of a good deal of it over the years. And I have a feeling of freedom this morning when I see California and Arizona sitting there arm in arm, smiling with each other. And Isaiah must be proud to finally recognize that they have come to reason together.
At the president's beckoning, Secretary of Interior Stuart Udall escorted Senator Hayden to front and center to witness the bill signing. The senator, a 58-year veteran of Congress, had fought for the bill for many years, and it was largely through his reasoning that congressional approval had been achieved.
And it's a landmark bill, a proud companion to the other 250 separate conservation measures that I've signed in the White House since I became president. For the millions of Americans west of the Continental Divide, it'll provide more water for growing cities. It'll provide more water for expanding industries, for the farmers' crops, and for the ranchers' cattle. And we'll do all of this without defiling or without despoiling the ancient and the spectacular landscapes along the Colorado. I think I know what a plentiful water supply can mean to a barren and parched countryside. I have carried a lot of irrigation pipe myself. I have seen irrigation ditches flow. I have seen the spring rains harnessed. I have seen floods prevented. I have seen families enjoy the serenity of a new lake shore where once there was only dust. So by taking this action today, I know from what I've seen that we are making the waters of the West a little sweeter.